I need you to picture this. A black woman walks into a courthouse she's worked in for decades. Calm, composed, unnoticed. Within minutes, she's humiliated, dragged into a side room and shaved like a criminal. But what they don't know is she's the judge. And when she takes that bench, it's not just a seat of power. It becomes a weapon of reckoning. You think you've seen courtroom drama? Not like this. Let's begin. The morning fog still clung to the stone steps of the Jefferson Federal Courthouse in Birmingham, Alabama, as if trying to muffle the day ahead. The streets were quiet, just a few early risers, clerks, junior attorneys, a lone reporter with a tripod. They moved with the sluggish calm of routine, unaware the world was about to tilt beneath their feet. Delilah Rhodes climbed the courthouse steps without ceremony. No robe, no escort. Just a gray blazer, slacks, and silver hair tied tightly in a dignified twist. She walked like a woman who'd done this 1,000 times, but looked like someone nobody thought twice about. A few courthouse staff passed her. None greeted her. One security guard turned his eyes away. At the metal detector, Sergeant Wade Cutler emerged, towering white and expressionless behind mirrored aviators. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "step aside. Random protocol check." Delilah held out her badge, Federal Judge ID, glinting under the fluorescent light. Cutler glanced at it, then slipped it into his pocket like it meant nothing. "What's this supposed to prove?" he muttered. "I'd like that back," she said evenly. He didn't respond, just nodded to two younger officers and gestured her toward a side hallway. Inside the stark screening room, no windows humming fluorescence, he barked. "Standard security for that kind of hair." Two bailiffs held her arms. Delilah's jaw tightened. "This is illegal!" Cutler powered on the clippers. The buzz filled the room like a swarm of hornets. Cold metal touched her scalp. Silver strands fell one after another. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. Only her voice cut through, low and precise. "You will regret this." When she stepped back into the hallway, her head uneven, raw patches exposed. Everyone turned, but no one spoke. She walked past whispers and downcast eyes until she reached Courtroom 1. The hearing was about to begin. Cutler entered first, smug. Delilah followed, silent. She didn't stop at the gallery. She climbed the steps, past stunned faces, frozen movements, and stood at the judge's bench. Then, from her bag, she pulled her robe, slipped it on, and said without raising her voice, "This courtroom will now come to order." The gavel hit. Cutler's face drained of color. And the courtroom, along with everything they thought they knew, changed forever. By late afternoon, the light outside Delilah's house in Northside Birmingham had turned a soft gold. Inside, it was quieter than usual. The only sound came from the ticking clock and the occasional turn of a page from Malik's book. He sat close, his knees tucked under him on the couch, stealing glances at his aunt's scalp, rough, uneven, still red in patches. He didn't say a word, but his eyes spoke volume. Delilah didn't need him to ask. She placed a steady hand on his shoulder, gave it a gentle squeeze. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I'm okay," she said, more to herself than to him. Then, with a pause, "But this world..." Later, alone in her study, she opened the wall safe. Inside, beneath old case files and a photo of her late brother, lay a black leather notebook, its edges frayed with time. She flipped it open. 12 names, 12 victims, all marked unsubstantiated, each one scratched onto the page like a promise never fulfilled. Delilah sat at her desk typing. Her fingers moved fast, her pulse faster. She compiled everything into a classified report and sent it directly to the Department of Justice. No filter, no delay. Miles away, ADA Brent Holloway got the alert. He didn't flinch. He smirked. With one hand, he dialed a private number. "DOJ's circling," he said. A pause. "She wants to go public? Let's make it personal." That night, Naomi Cross arrived. She stood tall in the doorway, all quiet command. A federal agent from D.C., sharp-suited, calm-eyed. "You just stepped on a hive, Judge," she said. "Cutler? He's nothing. The real ones don't wear name tags." At the courthouse, bailiff Leon Tate waited in the shadows. He led Delilah down to the archives, a narrow, dusty space no one visited. Together they uncovered the old complaints, each one dismissed, each one signed by Chief Judge Everett Mallory. Delilah stared at the final signature, her mentor, her friend. Her silence held weight. That night, a knock at the door, no one in sight, only an envelope. Inside, a photo, Malik walking home, a black SUV in the background. Bold red letters screamed, "Stay in your lane." The fight had begun, and this time, it was personal. Inside the Alabama DOJ field office, the air felt colder than the steel walls. A fluorescent buzz echoed through the meeting room as Delilah Rhodes, Agent Naomi Cross, and federal attorney Francis Bell stood before a wall covered in pinned documents, red string, and timelines. In the center, a digital screen flickered with a network chart, arrows, case numbers, missing evidence tags. Naomi's finger traced a red highlighted box. Darnell Rivers, 2019. Cutler's arrest, filed a complaint, then vanished. Francis added. His body cam footage disappeared 2 hours later, but there was a ghost login from a Graywell security IP address. That's not a coincidence. Graywell's not just a contractor, Naomi said. They fund the city's legal defense pool. Their reach is everywhere. Delilah's voice was steady, but her fists clenched. This isn't just brutality. It's a machine, one built to erase the truth. They knew what had to be done. Sunlight was their only defense, but as they prepared to go public, shadows moved. At the county detention center, Sergeant Cutler received a sealed envelope delivered without a name. Inside, photos of Delilah's home, her nephew's school route, and a crude layout of her house. Mr. Ford, a man with polished shoes and predator eyes, leaned in. The system that protected you still can, if you remember who you serve. Cutler said nothing, but his silence spoke more than he realized. Meanwhile, the smear campaign began. Local stations ran grainy photos of Delilah at a 1993 protest. Headlines shouted, "Judge Rhodes, anti-police radical." Talk shows speculated about her motives. Old wounds reopened. Trust cracked. But Delilah didn't waver. Francis Bell stood before reporters in a packed press hall, laying out every verifiable fact, every timeline. "This is not about politics," he declared. "This is about a pattern of suppression and abuse." Naomi took the podium next. "The public deserves to see the process. We're opening a live public hearing at Jefferson Courthouse, and we invite the world to watch." Later that evening, Delilah stepped onto the courthouse steps. Her hair, still patchy from the assault, caught the fading sun. The cameras blinked. She looked straight into the lens. "I'm not here to defend myself," she said. "I'm here to bring truth into the light." And with that, the war for justice truly began. The cameras were already rolling when Judge Delilah Rhodes stepped into courtroom 1 of the Jefferson Federal Courthouse. No robe, no gavel, just a sharp black blazer and a patchy scalp that hadn't yet healed. She didn't need symbols. Her presence was enough. She stood before the bench and spoke clearly, deliberately. "I don't need a robe to represent justice." Across Alabama, televisions lit up, phones buzzed, millions were watching. The screen behind her flickered to life. The room went silent. The footage played, no edits, no commentary, just the sound of buzzing clippers, the harsh lighting of a windowless room, and silver coils of hair falling to the floor. A sharp gasp came from the gallery. A woman clutched her chest. No one spoke. No one moved. The truth was louder than words. Naomi Cross took the floor next, calling 2 witnesses. First, a black woman, her wrist in a brace, voice trembling. "He slammed me down because I asked to see a warrant," she said. Then said I was resisting. Next, a young Latinx man, barely 20. "I don't remember much after the kick," he whispered. "They told me the footage was lost, just like my teeth." Both cases bore the fingerprints of one man, Brent Holloway. Then came the numbers. Francis Bell stepped forward, a stack of files in hand. A slide lit up the wall behind him. $250,000, 0 cents, from Graywell Security, wired to the city's Justice Fund. That fund in turn paid the legal fees for Sergeant Wade Cutler's defense team. Delilah stood again. "If justice has a price," she asked, "who exactly bought it?" The tension snapped. Delilah turned directly to Holloway. "Who deleted the Darnell Rivers footage?" He stammered. I don't recall." Naomi stepped forward with a printed log. The access came from his own office. The room erupted. A female lawyer stood, furious. "This entire system is rotten." Then from the back, a familiar voice. "Chief Judge Everett Mallory, this hearing undermines the dignity of our courts." Delilah faced him, calm, unflinching. "Sir, you taught me to never step down when truth is on the line. Today, I honor that lesson." Outside, hundreds gathered, chanting her name beneath courthouse lights. Inside, she sat quietly, hands trembling on the desk. But her eyes, at last, were fearless. The hallway outside the Alabama DOJ offices was colder than usual, but not from the air, from the weight, from the silence that settled when Sergeant Wade Cutler was led past, hands cuffed, head bowed. For the first time he looked small. No badge, no bark, no power. Just a man whose empire had cracked beneath his feet. The cameras zoomed in. His fingers trembled. His eyes were hollow, not from fear of prison but from watching the very system he once worshipped collapse around him. Inside, Judge Delilah Rhodes stepped into the grand jury room, not as a judge, but as a citizen. No robe, no bench. She stood at the center table, laid her hand gently on the wood, and spoke to the room of federal attorneys, community observers, and jurors watching with bated breath. "I stood up not because I was above the law," she said, voice low but resonant, "but because I refused to live beneath it." The pen of a clerk slipped from his hand and clattered against the floor. Naomi Cross blinked back tears. Frances Bell gave a near imperceptible nod. And outside that room, those words blazed across television screens, live updates and headlines like a rallying cry. The ripple was immediate. Brent Holloway resigned without a statement. Cameras caught him slipping from the courthouse in the rain, collar up, face unreadable. Chief Judge Everett Mallory was placed under federal suspension hours later. One reporter read his final memo aloud on air. "The system needs silence to heal." But no one was interested in silence anymore. In the courtroom, Reverend Samuel Briggs entered, holding a folder thick with names, 30 victims, all previously ignored. One by one, those once afraid stepped forward. A frail man with shaky hands signed his name slowly. A young mother in a hijab whispered, "For once, I'm not afraid." Then came Serena Delgado, calm but her voice quivered. "I marked those complaints as resolved, because I was told to. The order came from Mallory. His signature is here." She lifted the original forms. The red ink glared like a wound. The room froze. Delilah returned to the bench, not to speak, not to judge. She simply sat, her fingers curled around the arms of the chair, eyes lifted, not in fear, but in defiance. The courtroom didn't roar. It didn't have to. Justice had found its voice, and this time, it refused to be silenced. The morning sun spilled through the curtains of Delilah's home, casting warm light on the worn wooden floors. Malik burst through the front door, waving a letter in the air like a victory flag. "Auntie, I got in. I'm one of the young legal scholars of Alabama." Delilah dropped the dish towel in her hand and scooped him into a hug so tight he laughed. Her eyes welled with quiet pride. "You will do better than I ever did, my love," she whispered into his curls. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from hope. The kind that passes between generations like a torch. Later that week, on the steps of Jefferson Courthouse, a crowd gathered, not in protest, but in purpose. Cardboard signs rose high, "Justice for all or none. Truth doesn't need a robe." Rhodes changed the rules. Delilah climbed the steps without robe or escort, no podium. Just her and the people who refused to be silenced. She stood before them and breathed deeply. "I resign," she said, "not in defeat, but in fulfillment." Because justice doesn't cling to a seat. It moves with people. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was layered. Like waves over time, strong and unrelenting. Then came the announcement. The Monroe Mandate. A reform that would change how courthouses operated in Alabama. Mandatory ethics reviews for court officers, anti-bias training, and a transparent feedback loop from the public. No one in this courtroom, Delilah declared, should ever stand on the fear of another. The policy was born from pain, but signed with hope. 2 weeks later, under high chandeliers and surrounded by faces across the nation, Delilah stood at the White House. The president placed the Justice Medal over her shoulders. She stepped to the microphone. "I wasn't supposed to be here, but I am. And I'll make sure others will be too." Behind her stood Naomi, Malik, Maya Chen, Reverend Briggs, each one a testament to what happens when silence breaks. And in West Birmingham, beneath a cracked ceiling fan, Delilah now stood before a class of black schoolchildren, her robe replaced by a white button-down shirt, chalk in hand. She pointed to a board, Equal Protection Clause. A little girl raised her hand, eyes wide. "Can I be a judge, like you?" Delilah knelt beside her and smiled. "Not only you can, baby, you must." The camera pulled back. No robe, no bench, just a woman, and the light she carried. Justice, reborn in every word she spoke. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar, it rises quietly, from the cracks of silence we no longer ignore. This story wasn't just about right or wrong, it was about what happens when someone finally says, "Enough." It's a reminder that true change isn't loud, it's steady, unshakable, and born from the courage to stand when it's easier to stay seated. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that speak truth, power, and purpose.